This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
This is Global Business Africa coming to you live from Nairobi. I am Peninah Karibe. Let's begin with a look at the markets. The JSE was firmer today with its global peers mixed as markets struggle for direction amid an upbeat U.S. jobs report and the spread of the Delta strain of COVID-19. Investors cheered better than expected U.S. non-farm payroll numbers on Friday, but the spread of the highly transmissible Delta variant and the extent to which it could derail the recovery of the world economy remain a concern. Here in Kenya, the 20-share index dipped, this on the back of news that the monthly equity turnover at the Nairobi Securities Exchange fell by a third in July, indicating a reluctance by investors to let go of their stock at a time when share prices have been on the up at the market. The NSE said turnover fell to $85.2 million last month from $127.9 million in June, a 33.5% drop that reflected reduced activity on the large blue chip counter that dominates trading at the market. Coming up on the show tonight, health authorities in Guinea confirm one death from the highly infectious Marburg virus. Sub-Saharan Africa's working population to double in 30 years. And Egypt sees increased investment in its strategic Suez Canal economic zone. Let's begin in Guinea, where the World Health Organization said at least 4 people have turned up as contacts of a man who died from the Marburg virus. Staffers from the UN Health Agency were deployed to the West African country to help authorities prevent an outbreak of the Ebola-like virus. WHO spokesperson Fadela Chaib said this first case in Guinea, reported late on Monday, is also the first in West Africa, a region that was swept up by a devastating Ebola outbreak between 2014 and 2016 that killed over 11,000 people. The Marburg virus is a highly infectious hemorrhagic fever. The patient, who has since died, first sought treatment at a local clinic before his condition worsened. 12 major Marburg outbreaks have been reported in Southern and Eastern Africa since 1967.
The Marburg virus is very similar to Ebola. It starts with a very abrupt fever, headache, malaise, and bleeding. So this is why it's very easily confused with the Ebola virus. The difference with Ebola is the fact that we don't have a treatment, we don't have a vaccine for Marburg. We have some clinical trials being undertaken in different countries, but for the time being, there is no treatment for Marburg like we have a vaccine for Ebola. At least 4 people he came in contact with are asymptomatic, so they did not show the disease, but 10 WHO staff are in the community to do tracing, contact tracing, and also to help the authorities.
African Union officials say that the body has started shipping COVID-19 vaccine doses acquired through a Johnson & Johnson deal. The deal, signed in March, is for the purchase of 220 million doses of the company's single-shot jab. Angela Kupler has more on this story.
The bulk of the Johnson & Johnson vaccines will be produced in Aspen's Eastern Cape facility.
So generally the pipeline looks good. And there's a robust manufacturing cycle in place now, which will also carry us over into Q4. And again, South African government and the AU have indicated that everything that gets produced at Kabeja Aspen facility in Q4 will remain on African soil, either for South Africa and or the African Union.
The delivery of the vaccine to Africa is being dealt with by a third party.
Part of the distribution arrangement at this point in time, again, allows for the vaccine stock that is produced at Kabeja, for that to be shipped to Belgium. And then from Belgium, UNICEF is the agency that is responsible for distributing that in country to the 54 African countries. Of course, you don't need this in the 55th one, which is South Africa.
The AU says it wants to vaccinate between 650 and 750 million people on the continent to achieve community immunity. The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is seen as a solution.
It is more user-friendly on a continent like ours, which is not only geographically vast, but doesn't have very strong healthcare systems. It doesn't have thermo-friendly systems. And the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a more easier, more convenient option to use.
With production at the Eastern Cape facility of Aspen at full steam, it's now up to the rest of the manufacturers of the vaccine to provide what's needed for the AU to do what it needs to do and distribute to the rest of the continent. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, the working age population in sub-Saharan Africa is expected to more than double by 2050 to become the largest in the world. S&P Global Ratings estimates that growth in the working age population will add 3 percentage points to the average annual GDP growth for the next 10 years across key economies in the subcontinent. This comes as countries in sub-Saharan Africa are now experiencing the most significant demographic transition in their history. All right, let's dig into the report. Satyam Pandey is the S&P's Global Ratings senior economist. He joins us via Zoom from San Francisco in the US. Mr. Pandey, thank you very much for joining us. So this report obviously contains good news for the region. Are the countries involved well prepared to reap the benefits of this demographic transition?
Thanks for having me. In certain ways, given where the countries are in their economic income level, I would say that they have improved quite a bit in their capabilities in being able to sort of, get the dividends from this demographic transitions that we will see in the next 50 to 60 years. It's going to be a long process. And in the last 10 years or so, I would say the region, even though there is some variation, has become more open to trade. Some of the government borrowing has been more restrained, at least until the COVID environment came upon us. And also the central bank reform in many of the main countries have led to inflation being a little more range bound at reasonable levels. So all of those together gives me hope that they are moving in the right direction in getting ready for these demographic dividends. Nonetheless, I would point out that it is still vulnerable to some of the, regular issues, coming from the famine, political strifes, climate change, and the pandemic, like we just saw last year, and this year it continues.
All right, so you point out in that report two major factors, among others, of course, that could help the region capture this dividend. One is access to high-quality education, and the second is creation of formal sector employment. So where is the region on that?
Those both go hand in hand, access to quality education and formal work level employment. Right now, when we compare the sub-Saharan region with the comparable other countries of the same income level, I think most of the labor market indicators are on par, but it's the youth unemployment that's lagging a bit behind. That's the medium to larger, longer term challenge for sub-Saharan African countries. There seems to be three reasons. There's a high leakage in the early stages of education cycle per person. So this issue from youth transitioning from your school level age to an employment level age in the labor market seems to be, there's been a long gap. That's what the data shows. And also there's been less uptake in the vocational education to gain the skills necessary for both informal and formal job market. So that's where some of the things could be made even better in terms of just the youth unemployment and the skills that is required for this kind of transition.
Okay, so having said all of that, what are some of the policies countries can implement to help maximize the demographic dividend?
Whenever it comes to maximizing demographic dividends, you have to look in a more broad lens. And one thing that really comes into mind is women's participation rate. I think some of the policies that eliminate marriages before 18, childbirth before 18, just in general, obstacles for women to join the labor force should be minimized. Besides that, a lot of the diversified nature of growth should be in mind, rather than just relying on one commodity-related growth cycle or so. In those, manner, I think policy should be more focused. But again, I would certainly stress that we should not forget the informal sector as well, because at this stage of development in most of the countries, there's a large share of informal sector, and we should pay attention to the informal sector as well, the small and medium-sized family farms and firms, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting you talk about the informal sector, because obviously, like you said, it's where the majority of the population in this region ends up. But then if you were to talk about achieving this growth, which sectors do you see providing the most opportunities for job creation?
I think at the end of the day, you have to try to look for ways to tap into the global trade and investment value chain. And for that, given some of the foundational aspects, the quality education and technology infrastructure, that you probably should have some investments going into those sectors, but at the same time be able to tap into those growth value chains across the borders. And some of the network effects itself, folks that migrate out of the region to somewhere else, and then they either come back or they actually share some of the knowledge, some of the skills, and those kinds of network effect has to be in play. And most of those tend to happen more in the productivity generating sectors, such as manufacturing and services of high-tech types.
All right, Sachin Pandit, thank you very much for your time. Let's delve into your corporate headlines. And damage to banks and ATMs during July's violence and looting in South Africa is expected to cost more than $100 million to repair. The Banking Association of South Africa says banks are still working on infrastructure recovery plans in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. It further adds that 1,400 ATMs and 269 bank branches were vandalized or destroyed. Middle East's biggest lender, Qatar National Bank, has asked a U.S. court to order Eritrea to pay an estimated $300 million of debt. This comes after the country failed to respond to the bank's claim, seeking to enforce a UK ruling in 2019. QNB alleges that the government went to drastic lengths to avoid being served with key documents. Telecom Egypt's revenue has surged to $250 million for the first half of 2021. This represents an 88% growth compared to the same period last year. The company's total consolidated revenue is $1.1 billion. That's up 16% year on year. The company adds that it has received a second payment from its profit share in Vodafone Egypt worth $230 million in July. And Amazon's move into digital advertising has impacted Google, since shoppers often bypass the search giant and look for products directly on Amazon.com. Now, the world's largest online retailer is starting to grab advertisers from Facebook too. And this comes after Apple introduced privacy changes on iPhones that have made Facebook advertising less effective. The move has prompted some brands to seek alternatives to advertising on the social media giant and its Instagram unit. Those are your corporate headlines. It's fast approaching 15 minutes into the hour. This is Global Business. Still ahead. Tourism in East Africa struggles to recover as region battles a new wave of the coronavirus. And climate change leads to a decline in cocoa production in Cameroon.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. there is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back. Russia has resumed flights to the Egyptian Red Sea resorts, ending a ban that has lasted almost 6 years. Russia ranks among the most important tourist markets to Egypt, as the number of its tourists to the North African state surpassed 3.1 million before the ban. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more on this report from Cairo.
A ceremonial salute and joy marked the arrival of the first Russian flights to land in the Egyptian Red Sea resorts after more than half a decade. The special greetings reserved to welcome the visitors at the Sharm el-Sheikh airport reflect the importance of the Russian tourism for Egypt. Authorities in Moscow had slapped Egypt with a flight ban in 2015 after a Russian passenger jet went down in Sharm el-Sheikh, killing all 224 passengers on board and subsequently dealing a huge blow to Egypt's tourism industry.
They are 35% of the total occupation of Sharm el-Sheikh. The Russian, it's very, very important things. First of all, they are very good spender. They spend good money, okay? And they love the destination. And they are repeated guests. I have to admit that we've been suffering for 5 years since that plane crashed.
The return, though belated, has come at the right time, as the industry had also suffered from the fallout caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. Occupancy rates at the warm weather beach resort cities dropped by 85% in 2020. Industry players have been seeking alternative markets to make up for the travel restrictions imposed by the major European and American markets.
In the beginning, it was, that we closed totally for 3 months. So every private sector, he took in his shoulders to pay the wages. We decided to go to the East Europe, okay? And we have Ukrainian, and we have Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and of course the domestic also help a lot. I have to tell you right now, Sharm el-Sheikh occupation around 75 to 80%, which is very good, okay, without the Russian. But imagine when the Russian will be back.
The resumption of Russian tourism follows a major overhaul of security systems in Egypt's airports and resort cities, as well as extensive security checks by continuous European delegations in the last few years. Russian officials also made sure the anti-COVID-19 health measures are applied in the resort cities to guarantee the safety of its travelers.
Sharm el-Sheikh, as you notice, I'll show you now here, if I stand up, this badge that I am vaccinated. All the hotels here, all the stuff, they are vaccinated. Sharm el-Sheikh, I can say 95% it's a green area of COVID-19.
At the moment, Russian airlines and local carrier Egypt Air will each be running 10 flights a week to Sharm el-Sheikh and Hurghada Red Sea resorts. Experts hope the numbers will keep on rising going into the popular Christmas and New Year season. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Uganda says it has lost $1.1 billion in tourism revenue since the outbreak of the pandemic 2 years ago. Local authorities say successive waves of COVID-19 have kept visitors away, especially from Uganda's national parks, which have been particularly hard hit. CGTN's Hilary Ayesiga reports.
Gerard Katongole is going over his bookings. Some visitors have cancelled, while others are rescheduling their travel plans. He blames this situation on the second wave of COVID-19, which hit the country 2 months ago.
You wouldn't really convince some tourists to still come to the country after hearing of a lockdown. Some really did not come, so they cancelled. Those that were already in the country, we managed to work with them.
Katongole says he has lost about $5,000 in cancellations in the last 2 months alone. Government figures show that tourism revenues have dropped by 73% in the last 2 years because of the pandemic. And in order to make up some of the shortfall in revenue, the government is trying to promote domestic tourism. The Ugandan government has launched a campaign dubbed Take on the Pearl, which is designed to attract more Ugandans to the national parks.
Government has intensified promotional campaigns specifically to promote domestic tourism, to attract more Ugandans to visit Uganda, but also to attract other international markets.
The government is also handing out tax incentives and low-interest loans to tour companies.
Uganda Development Bank was capitalized by government to extend low-interest credit to tourism enterprises. These interest rates offered by UDB are about half the rates availed to private businesses by other commercial institutions within the country.
The government also hopes that COVID-19 vaccines will help bring confidence back to the travel industry. Just 1 million people out of 22 million have been vaccinated so far, making hopes of a return to normal elusive. The key will be keeping tour operators afloat in the more immediate future. Hilary Isiga, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
A recent UN report shows that East Africa's tourism decline will contribute to a loss of 9.3% to the region's economy this year. It will be the second most impacted region in the world after Central America and the worst affected in Africa. Developing countries have been hurt by vaccine inequity. But it may not be all bad. A leading luxury hotel in Kenya has just reopened its hotels in the Mara Game Reserve. Let's get more insights from Mehdi Murad, Accor Country General Manager and the General Manager of Fairmont Hotels and Resorts in Kenya. Thank you very much, Mr. Murad, for joining us. So it's been a tough 1.5 years for your industry. Just give us a scope of how much you've been impacted by this pandemic.
Good evening, and thank you for welcoming me today. I mean, the impact has been big, let's face it. A lot of hotels are still closed, a lot of hotels have not opened yet, but beyond hotels, it's all the economy that is linked to tourism that's been hit. Be it the restaurants, be it the tour guides, tour operators, conservancy even, communities. You know, we often speak about the direct jobs of hospitality and tourism, but beyond that, there's a lot of indirect jobs and livelihoods linked to that. As we speak today, you know, restaurants have still to close before 9 p.m. because of the curfew. We are still on reduced staffing for most of the hotels, restaurants. A lot of people are still jobless, sadly, they either lost their job, either they have not been called back to their jobs, or they are on reduced pay. So no, it's a very, very, very difficult time for us. I mean, certainly the worst in the history of tourism, definitely.
And we're now seeing a faster vaccine campaign in Western countries. And here in Kenya, we just heard a directive from the government talking about public servants getting vaccinated by the 23rd of this month. So are all of these factors helping in the recovery of the sector?
Basically, what helps us today, it is helping. Let's be realistic. We are optimistic. I mean, we have to be optimistic anyway. All the Western countries and the Western world being vaccinated is creating, of course, our tourists, our classical tourists, to travel back to us and come to us in confidence. Civil servants will help the country, definitely. Tourism, not necessarily. We would need to have all the employees of tourism and all the country vaccinated. That's what we're looking at certain point. We know that there is inequality when it comes to the vaccines, and I don't believe, sadly, that the world has done its job, because, you know, it's very nice to hear people saying we're going to send vaccines to Africa, but where are they? I mean, how many countries have ordered more than they need? It's a bit of a shame, but we are happy at least to see some recovery, because all our, you know, the classical tourist of Kenya, for example, is a Western person in late 50s, 60s and above. So they are vaccinated. This is the population that has been vaccinated all over the world first. So we see people eager to travel, and people want to travel. people don't want to go to the big resorts like before, but rather to fantastic experiences. You know, we spoke about our hotel. We opened the Fairmont Mara Safari Club. And we're so amazed about the number of local and international tourism coming to us. So yeah, no, we are hopeful. We definitely need to increase vaccination in Kenya. We know that there's limitations for that, of course, but also the only thing that can be a threat to us for the moment, two things. Number one is that these color codes that all the countries, they keep changing. Tomorrow, one country puts you in amber, red, or whatever they call it, then your tourists cannot travel to you anymore. And a little bit also of that airlines haven't come back to the volume they had before COVID. So now that we see people eager to travel, we don't necessarily find flights to come to Kenya. And that's another issue. But vaccination, definitely a positive one.
And so last month, the East African community talked about a plan to revitalize the sector. And this, of course, included boosting not just local tourism, but regional as well. Are these factors likely to contribute, or maybe I should ask, how much of a contribution will this make to at least keep the sector afloat?
So you see, the interesting part, one thing we have to recognize, and it's a brilliant thing, and it's also a good thing to be optimistic for the future. One is that local tourism is doing very well. I mean, you take Mara. Mara is visited by so many people. People love it. And it's an amazing occasion. It's the second year in a row, but more this year where people are more confident to travel. We see a lot of interest in Masai Mara. We have also Fairmont, Mount Kenya. All these places very much demanded. Regional, let's hope. I mean, it would be great if there's really some good support for some facilitations, some things to boost the tourism. And again, connections. We still lacking a lot of connections for the regional tourism. But obviously, today I would say that in Kenya, your local tourism represents pretty much in easily 50% to 80%, depending on the areas. Regional is still very slow because people would come necessarily mostly to cities like Nairobi and so on. But tourism in terms of leisure, wildlife, because surrounding countries have also their wildlife, have also their beaches and so on. So no, not as good as the local, but you know, when we say regional, it also affects the local, and that's very, very good. And you know, we underestimated what local tourism could represent, like pretty much everywhere in the world. We are very happy and hopeful for better, for more.
Okay, and finally, Mr. Murad, I noticed that you reopened your hotel in the Masai Mara Game Reserve. That's brilliant, really. And we're right at the peak of the wildebeest migration in the Masai Mara. That's a huge attraction. And I'm just curious to know, what's the kind of uptick you're expecting with this kind of decision you've made?
I mean, we are very, very happy. We have a lot of weekends 100% full. We don't have space. No, it's really good, really good. And, you know, local tourism comes in the weekdays, especially now it's the holidays period. And people discover areas they don't know. You know, Mara is not only about the main park. There's a lot of conservancies. And Fairmont Mara Safari Club is on a conservancy, Old Choro, close to Lemek. You should see the game we got there. It's not only about the migration. It is really Kenyans rediscovering Kenya or discovering Kenya. And we're really proud to be part of this. And it's doing very, very well.
All right. Thank you very much for your time tonight, Mr. Mehdi Morad. All right, you're watching Global Business. Let's take a short break coming up.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live, Find your voice.
In other headlines at this hour, relentless rain in South Sudan is once again causing flooding in parts of the country, washing away crops, livestock and displacing people. The United Nations is warning that flooding is likely to worsen the food security situation. This is in a country where the UN says 3/4 of the people are struggling to get one meal a day. At least 7 people have died due to forest fires in Algeria. So far, 2 people have been seriously injured by the fires. This is according to the Civil Defense Authority. The government says arsonists are responsible for the fires. The Interior Minister says an investigation will be launched to identify those responsible. The army is also supporting efforts to control the flames. So far, 19 fires have been reported in 14 districts. Uganda has started rolling out a 3rd round of vaccination after the country received donations from China and Norway. The country plans to inoculate at least 22 million of its population, but just 1.1 million people have so far been vaccinated. And a joint Rwandan-Mozambican force says they have regained control of key port town of Mocimboa Praia in Mozambique. Rwanda sent a 1,000-strong force to the country in July. That's a look at the top stories of the day. Moving on to the United States, more than 30 leading trade groups have urged the Biden administration to resume negotiations with China and remove tariffs, which they say are harming the U.S. economy. The trade groups add that the U.S. government should ensure Beijing meets its commitments under the 2020 Phase 1 trade deal and increase purchases of American goods during the rest of this year. The move comes as U.S. industries face increased costs to manufacture products and provide services domestically, making their exports of these products and services less competitive abroad. That's after the U.S. maintained tariffs on Chinese imports to put pressure on Beijing to fulfill its obligations under the trade pact. Meanwhile, the United States says it is considering lowering tax rates to offset the growing debt burden due to the epidemic. A study commissioned by the U.S.-China Business Council in January of this year reveals that former U.S. President Donald Trump's trade policies led to over 250,000 job losses. The escalating trade war and decoupling will see production fall by $1.6 trillion in the 5 years from 2021 to 2025 and result in over 700,000 fewer jobs in 2022 and 320,000 fewer jobs in 2025. The report adds that U.S. households will have lost an estimated $6,400 in real income by the end of 2025. U.S. lawmakers are trying to complete legislation that puts green energy at the heart of a $1 trillion infrastructure upgrade. Senators reached consensus just as the United Nations issued a stark warning about how fast climate change is accelerating. But there is also concern that the cost will cripple a heavily indebted federal government. Owen Fairclough explains.
If U.S. President Joe Biden is in a hurry...
Do you see that sucker over there? 0 to 60 in 4.1 seconds. It's all electric.
Then the United Nations warning that climate change is happening faster than the world thought is a call to accelerate efforts to find cleaner, greener transport.
I'm signing an executive order setting out a target of 50% of all passenger vehicles sold by 2030 will be electric.
Senators spent the weekend moving closer to that goal, agreeing a $1 trillion infrastructure upgrade that aims to protect the environment.
The largest investment in clean energy transmission in history. The largest investment in climate resiliency in history. And the largest investment in transportation electrification in history.
And with climate change yet another touchstone for political polarization, this deal was a rare victory for bipartisanship.
We will demonstrate that both Republicans and Democrats can come together and do big things.
But a bill that took months to negotiate must now be signed off by the lower House of Representatives. And Democrats say they'll do so only once they've agreed another bill that includes spending to mitigate climate change. And that's more than 3 times as expensive as the infrastructure deal.
If the UN is issuing a new wake-up call about the accelerating impact of climate change,
Well, the Congressional Budget Office here in the United States is concerned about all this new government spending. It says the cost of the infrastructure bill alone will swell the federal budget deficit by some $256 billion. And now the Treasury Department says that unless the US addresses its borrowing limits urgently, the federal government is in danger of running out of money to function in just a few months' time. Owen Fairclough, CGTN, Washington.
When countries and industries start to go green, they don't just change themselves. They can create a lot of new business opportunities in the process. Green manufacturing has the same needs that traditional manufacturing does, which means needs for green finance and, yes, even green insurance. Zhang Xishuan takes a look at the growing market.
Environmental pollution liability insurance has probably been one of the most well-known forms of green insurance so far. China first started trials of it in 2008 to test the use of market actors and mechanisms in mitigating environmental pollution. Peninah was one of the first companies to offer the environmental liability insurance services. But it's during the past 5 years that the company has seen a skyrocketing jump in demand.
In the early development stage of environmental liability insurance, it occupied a very small portion of the whole industry. In 2012, only around 2,000 companies purchased the insurance, with a total coverage of only 200 billion yuan. But with the amendment of China's environmental protection law in 2015 and the establishment of green finance pilot zones in areas like Jiangxi and Zhejiang, there are now a lot more environmental liability insurance products. We're working with Tsinghua University and Suzhou University to set up a risk management platform for them.
And environmental liability insurance is only part of the market. Since the end of the 1990s, China Pacific Property Insurance has offered policies for projects in hydroelectric power and photovoltaic power. During the first half of this year, the company was covering more than 150 hydroelectric power projects, with policy values of more than 50 billion yuan. Its green insurance coverage for photovoltaic power projects was almost 100 billion yuan during the same period. But they're finding even this large market is growing and changing.
Most purchasers of green insurance are institutions or companies with very few individual buyers. Our catastrophic loss coverage has few individual buyers, with most being company owners or the government. We're working to expand our coverage to individual purchasers, though. One of our fairly mature practices at the moment is for new energy vehicles. We want to take new energy vehicles as the primary way to focus more on individuals in our green consumption network.
During the first 6 months of the year, the company sold commercial auto insurance coverage to 400,000 new energy vehicle owners. To grow that, the company has made a focus on environment, society, and governance a corporate strategy, and established a new group specifically to work on green and low-carbon development.
As China continues to plan for green and sustainable development with the opening of the country's carbon trading market, there's also an increasing demand for green insurance. Last year alone, almost 2 trillion yuan in green insurance coverage were purchased for clean energy projects, posting an annual growth rate of 20%. Experts say there is still plenty of room for the market to grow.
One important insurance function is to decrease the uncertainties and then lower people's concern and increase their confidence and then encourage the changes. Insurance companies can leverage the insurance capital's long-term, long-duration advantage to invest the future with a longer-term return. This kind of investment on the ESG business and technology can also enable the insurance companies with appropriate capabilities to design, to price, and to manage the green insurance risks.
Zhou points out that green insurance products should provide protection against a variety of risks, including environmental pollution, the impact of climate change, and poor handling of carbon trades. This, he says, will require more regulations from the government to help insurance companies better understand how their products should develop. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
With COVID-19 cases on the rise, the city of San Francisco in the U.S. has returned to a policy of requiring masks indoors in public places. But one of the hardest hit sectors, the bar industry, is already moving to tighten entry requirements. Mark New has the details.
I had a very organized way.
Motown Monday at Madrone Art Bar in San Francisco. To enter, it's no longer enough to show your driver's license.
And do you have proof of vaccination?
Now, customers are showing proof of COVID-19 vaccination.
I showed my vaccination card when I came in, even though I've been coming here for about 10 years, to respect their policy and to show my respect for the nature of the disease.
I'm very glad to be able to go out and trust that the bars are going to be looking out for me and looking out for all of their patrons and their staff. So yeah, it does make me feel more comfortable about going out.
The people who come here are pretty open-minded about it, and I think that what we're trying to say is, if you're not vaccinated, when you come when it's a busy night, look inside. You know, why would you want to be in this room if you're not vaccinated? I'm not in the social distancing business. I'm in the social intimacy business.
The San Francisco Bar Owners Alliance is a coalition of more than 500 people and 300 bars. They recently made the decision to require customers who want to come inside to either show a proof of vaccination or proof that they've tested negative for COVID.
The founder of the San Francisco Bar Owner Alliance, Ben Blyman, says it's entirely up to the bars themselves to decide whether to implement the policy. The alliance polled members and found more than 82% supported the policy.
The debate was very, very civil. You know, most people who were against it just didn't think it was practical or had concerns about how effective it would be. A lot of them have come around. In fact, I think most of the people who voted against it were actually people who are doing it. We know that unvaccinated individuals are, right now, it looks like 8 times more likely to spread COVID, to contract it and spread it. You know, we do know that vaccinated individuals can get it and spread it at the same rate, but they're not getting it at 8 times at the rate.
Although Blyman says he's had to deal with plenty of internet trolls posting hostile comments, he says customers have been overwhelmingly supportive. Blyman also had to deal with the harsh realities of shutting down his bar due to COVID cases.
One of my employees contracted COVID. He was fully vaccinated at a different bartending job of his, and he wasn't able to work, and we weren't able to cover his shift, so I actually had to close one night 2 weeks ago. We just closed one night, but that one night, I mean, we're deeply in debt. COVID has been a hugely difficult year and a half for bars in the city of San Francisco, and all of us are in debt. We don't know how many years it's going to take us to get out of it. We need every dollar right now.
We're trying to keep ourselves safe. We're trying to keep our customers safe. We also need to survive, you know, from a business standpoint, because we've been closed for so long. So trying to find a way where we can coexist.
The bar owners we talked to say tightening restrictions gives them the best chance to stay open and keep serving customers for years to come.
Cheers!
Mark New, CGTN, San Francisco.
After a year and a half of mostly empty streets, tourists are slowly returning to the German capital, Berlin. But are the local visitors enough to make up for its lack of international tourists? Let's find out.
They are back. For months, Paris Platz in front of Berlin's iconic Brandenburg Gate was almost empty. But now, tourists are once again flocking to the square, taking in the historical site and, of course, taking some selfies. Germany is mostly open to tourists from other European Union countries, although unvaccinated visitors must take a COVID-19 test before arrival. Rytis Pajacis and his wife drove all the way to Berlin from Lithuania, something they planned to do last year but had to postpone because of the pandemic.
We had 2 years at home. We can't go because it was Corona time, and now we can feel free. Yeah, now we are free.
At the DDR Museum, located next to the River Spree, tourists are lining up to enter.
We are at about 40% compared to 2019. That means that 60% is missing, mostly international visitors that aren't traveling to the city. It is developing slowly, but surely since we opened on the 24th of June.
The museum is one of Berlin's top Cold War historical attractions, normally drawing up to 1 million visitors a year. but the museum was forced to close for 7 months due to restrictions imposed to stop the spread of COVID. During open months, there were often other curbs on how many visitors were allowed into the museum at a time. It's now operating at full capacity, although some rules remain, such as visitors wearing face masks. Tourists say they're not worried.
Yes, I do feel safe. We are in the open air here, for example, so masks are not mandatory. And once we are inside the buildings, we keep distancing, we use masks, so there is no reason to be afraid.
Unlike many other European capitals, Berlin lacks large industries. Tourism is an important and growing industry. The city often ranks third on lists of most visited European cities after London and Paris.
The structure in Berlin is very clearly focused on tourism and provides for 250,000 workplaces. That is, of course, an economical factor in Berlin. We don't have much industry here, and many service providers are also tied to the tourism sector.
COVID-19 infections are increasing again in Germany, but the spread is still lower than in other European countries, such as France, the UK, and Spain. Li Chong, CGTN.
Let's go through the commodities market. Oil prices rose more than $1 today, recouping some of the losses in the previous session as rising demand in Europe and the US outweighed concerns about a rise of COVID-19 cases in Asian countries. Crude oil inventories are expected to have fallen by about 1.1 barrels in the week to August 6th, according to the average estimate of 6 analysts polled by Reuters. Economic data this week, especially the US Consumer Price Index on Wednesday, will provide guidance on how hard the virus will hit global and regional oil consumption. Still ahead on Global Business. Egypt in deals to establish new industrial parks at the Suez Canal Economic Zone.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Let's now turn to Zambia, where the country has just opened a second terminal at its main international airport as part of the country's drive to modernize its infrastructure. Esther Tal has more.
The second terminal will increase the capacity of passengers at the Kenneth Kaunda International Airport. The airport will be able to welcome 4 million passengers, twice its current capacity. Zambia's President Edgar Lungu noted it will help the country become an aviation hub. The project was built by Chinese construction company Jiangxi Corporation for International Economic and Technical Cooperation.
The Chinese government is an all-weather friend, and they have done a very commendable job, in helping this country, and in particular this aviation subsector in terms of this project. So we are really very grateful to the Chinese government and the people of China for this assistance and so many help that they have given us in various other sectors.
China's ambassador to Zambia said the project signified the strong relations between Zambia and China. Asatal, CGTN.
High carbon emissions are pushing temperatures in cocoa-producing countries to rise by an average 3.8 degrees Fahrenheit. This dries up the moisture needed for trees to flourish, devastating the region's cocoa production. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says that the change in climate patterns could have negative impacts on export earnings on which the countries depend. CGTN's Alexandria Majella finds out how this has impacted cocoa farming in Cameroon.
For more than 6 decades, the cocoa that Richard Ambassa Mbasiga harvested from his plantation in central Cameroon faithfully paid for everything his family needed. Irregular rainfall and prolonged dry seasons have since sucked the moisture from the soil, killed cocoa trees, and cut the yield from his farm. Now unable to fill even a single bag with beans, the 77-year-old struggles just to buy soap with the harvest that once put his children through school.
I used to produce about 15 bags per year, and now I cannot even produce 1 bag. As you can see, I cannot produce even 1 bag. I cannot. There has been 4 months of drought. You see here, everything is scorched. This used to be a productive plantation. Now everything is scorched. 3 hectares are destroyed because of the drought. I present to you my 3-hectare plantation. How am I going to live with my family?
Farmers are struggling to even achieve yields of just 500 kilograms per hectare compared to 1 ton per hectare a few years back. Prolonged dry seasons linked to climate change has made poor harvest a new reality for many cocoa farmers who farm in small individual holdings. This leaves Africa's 3rd largest cocoa producer, behind Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, struggling to meet a long-term target of boosting cocoa output to over 300,000 tons annually.
I cleared at least 2 hectares. The rest is abandoned. I'm discouraged to clear it. I'm discouraged to clear the 2.5 hectares left here.
A report by United Nations panel of experts ahead of the 2015 Paris Climate Summit warned that if global carbon emissions continue to rise, cocoa economies too could melt away in the ensuing heat. Cocoa trees thrive in humid equatorial areas that experience predictable bouts of sunshine and heavy rain like West and Central Africa, where about 70% of the world's beans currently come from. If carbon emissions aren't soon curbed, climate scientists expect temperatures in cocoa-producing countries to rise by 3.8 degrees Fahrenheit on average, drying up the moisture needed for trees to flourish and devastating the region's cocoa production, the UN report said. Alexandria Mashala for CGTN.
Egypt's strategic Suez Canal economic zone is poised to see more success as more foreign investment pours in. Just this week, authorities signed 3 deals with Russia, Romania and a local developer to establish 3 industrial parks at the economic zone. With the details, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim.
Ahmed Mustafa owns a casting factory that supplies its iron products to cement plants and water projects. He says lately there's been a lot of improvement by the government in enhancing the business climate to encourage more investments.
There is full state support to all Egyptian producers, such as financial initiatives from the central bank to fund SMEs. For the first time, as industrialists, we don't have financing issues, no regulation drawbacks, no bureaucracy, as we have the one-stop shop now. Also, any complaint from a producer is dealt with by the top officials at the cabinet.
Although Egypt has been the top African destination for foreign direct investments for the last 3 years, the government feels there's potential for much more investments in the North African state. And attracting more investors to tap into the industrial parks at the Suez Canal economic zone is seen as one way to meet this goal.
Suez Canal area in particular enjoys a strategic location that allows it easy access to road transport, seaports and energy sources, making it the right destination for any industrial or service projects that want to grow and succeed.
Authorities in Cairo are laying out all the ingredients to make the country an attractive destination for foreign investors.
The park has the advantage of being more flexible concerning rules and regulations away from the bureaucracy that slowed operations in the past. Factories enjoy quicker port clearances and there is more financial support from banks. There are tariff facilities when importing raw materials and exporting products regionally, and there is a specialized company providing all the infrastructure at international standards. Suez Canal has 7 electricity power plants, 2 desalination plants for electricity and water supply, as well as high-speed fiber optic internet services.
Investors say China's industrial park in Egypt, Tida, is a success story that others are emulating. Built on 7.2 million square meters at a cost of $350 million, the park has tens of Chinese factories with investments soaring to $6 billion.
The Suez Canal is a focal point on China's Silk Road, which China deems an important area because it is a corridor that links about 2/3 of the world's populations. That accounts for about 70% of total economic output. All this goes through the Suez Canal and therefore will boost the industrial parks at the Suez Canal economic zone.
And it's these reasons that have attracted Russia and Romania to invest in millions of square meters in the Suez Canal this week to build huge industrial parks, and thereby paving the way for more foreign investments to pour into the country. Yasser Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
In South Africa, a Chinese language competition was held in Cape Town. The winners will have the opportunity to study in China for free. This includes tuition as well as food, lodging and round-trip air tickets. Let's take a look.
With COVID-19 restrictions, many South African teenagers feel robbed of their normal school life. Classes are rotational, with half the school attending one week and the other half attending the next.
I miss school so much because I have nothing to do at home.
I definitely want to come back to school. I miss learning every day. I feel like I'm missing a lot of information, and they've also cut the curriculum, so I feel like there's a lot less information that I'm getting that I would have been getting if there was no pandemic.
So when this year's Chinese language contest was announced, many teenagers turned up. For them, this is an opportunity to prove their skills in Mandarin as they sample the rich Chinese culture.
What's your favorite Chinese city?
After a bruising battle, Lisa Diman emerged top, and she has her inspiration.
I really love the Chinese food, and I love the people and the environment, and I would like to learn more about their culture.
The competition in its 14th year has been taking place since 2008.
For the Mandarin culture and for the competition, it's there just to support, to guide, to give them the opportunity to expose our learners. Our grade 8s and 9s do it full time, and then our grade 10s, 11s and 12s, obviously they choose it as a choice of subject. And so for us as a school, it's just to ensure that we bridge the gap in culture and in education.
For Lisa and the second place winner, they will travel to China to represent South Africa in the finals. The third and fourth place winners will accompany them to watch the competition. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
Let's look at the currencies. The South African rand has remained on its back foot thus far this month. It could still be susceptible to a further correction over the coming weeks if the dollar's resurgence and global growth concerns continue to dampen commodity prices. The rand has lagged major developed and emerging economy currencies across the board this past week in an underperformance that is being perpetuated by an ongoing turn higher in USD to the rand, which rose slightly above 14.80 in today's session. And with that, we come to the end of Global Business Africa tonight. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on our digital media platforms. I'm Peninah Karibe. Thank you for watching.